Good evening. My name is Matt Holzman, and I'm a member of the Mental Health Committee here at Our Lady Queen of Angels. And on behalf of our faith community and our mental health ministry, welcome. You are not alone. You are not alone. Individuals struggling with mental illnesses, family members, first responders, caregivers, and friends, we are all in this together. In 2014, Saddleback Church, our diocese, and our faith communities formally engaged in mental health ministry. Some congregations had done so much earlier, but at the gathering on mental health in the church, a mass movement was launched. And today, we are seeing faith communities across the country engaging and walking with those suffering from mental illnesses and their families. Look to your left and to your right. 1 in 5 of us will have a mental health crisis in our lifetimes. Virtually all of us will know someone who has been in crisis at one time or another. Sometimes these are fleeting: anxiety, depression, obsession. But in many cases, mental illnesses can be as serious as cancer or heart disease or diabetes with similar effect. We must recognize that mental illnesses are biological and psychological, and that our spiritual state affects our wellness. These are diseases of the whole person. They are at the core of who we are, and they should be treated as such. We have to knock down the walls that divide us, for none of us is an island. Each of us has value and something to contribute. We are not alone, and we can help each other. Tonight you will hear from some of our country's most articulate advocates and experts. They will tell us why and how and what can be done. Orange County is breaking down the barriers, and our faith communities, our first responders, our medical and healthcare professionals, our advocates, our business community, and our governments are coming together to change the system. Our goal is to improve access, improve the quality of care, and improve outcomes. And to do this with compassion and common sense. We want Orange County to have the best behavioral health care in the country. We are at a unique time and place. We can do this. We need your help and your ideas. Our goal is ambitious, but already we have found models all over the country that can be adapted to Orange County's needs and realities. But if we are going to shoot for the stars, we will need your creativity and your common sense. In the interest of time, we would ask that you hold your questions until after all of our speakers are done. There are pencils and papers somewhere around the room, and there was supposed to be anyway, I thought, and it's my fault, a microphone somewhere back there so you could ask them directly, but we'll figure that one out. And we'll take a 10-minute break after our second speaker, and then we'll come back and finish the program off. So thank you all very much, and God bless you all.
Good evening and welcome. My name is James Sanders. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist locally, and I'm a member of the Our Lady Queen of Angels Mental Health Committee. Louder. All right. My name is James Sanders. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I work locally, and I'm a member of the parish here and representative of the Mental Health Committee. First off, I want to thank Father Carey and Bishop Van for their diocese-wide leadership and vision with broadening this ministry. I also want to thank our ministry members, Matt Holzman. He's done, the one who just spoke, he's done, I would say, 98% of the work here. I would encourage each of you to join our ministry. You don't have to be a member of the parish, but we're going to have a sign-up sheet over on the side. We could always use your help. Anything, just spreading the word and getting the word out there. I encourage each of you to join our ministry to bringing empathy, compassion, and awareness to break through our social denial and stigma concerning mental health and illness. This ministry wants to bring awareness, love, dialogue, and collective improvement of mental health and illness among all spectrums. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker tonight, who almost doesn't need an introduction. Kay Warren co-founded Saddleback Church with her husband Rick Warren in Lake Forest, California. She's a passionate Bible teacher, a respected advocate for people living with mental illness, orphaned, and vulnerable children, as well as for people living with HIV and AIDS. Kay is an executive committee board member for the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention. Kay is the author of Sacred Privilege, Your Life in Ministry as a Pastor's Wife, Choose Joy Because Happiness Isn't Enough, Say Yes to God, and co-author of Foundations, the popular systematic theology course used by churches worldwide. Her children are Amy, Josh, and Matthew, who is in heaven, and she has 5 grandchildren, which she's extremely proud of. Without further ado, Kay Warren.
I don't know. I thought the bingo thing was I thought we were coming to talk about mental health, but if we're playing bingo, I'm ready. Somebody call out the numbers. I got the little bag and everything. Okay. So I'm going to try and take this out there unless the sound person screams at me. So scream. Duet? Go ahead. I can. Okay. I've been given permission. Believe me, this is going to be better. Just hang on. Okay. Now you should be able to hear me. Is that good? Okay. Great. All right. So it is really an honor to be with you tonight, and I thank you for the opportunity to talk about mental illness, about suicide prevention, grief recovery, and the faith community, and I've been told I can do all that in 20 minutes, so we'll see where that goes. So I am not a mental health professional. I am not a mental health. I have had no medical training. I am not a social worker. I'm not a substance abuse disorder counselor. I am a grieving mother who lost her beautiful 27-year-old son, Matthew, to suicide on April 5th, 2013. And if you can count, this is March the 15th. In just a very short time, it will be the 5th anniversary of our Matthew's death. I didn't volunteer to become an advocate for people living with mental illness and for suicide prevention. I was thrust into the work by the terrible death of my son. Shortly after Matthew died, if you've lost someone to suicide, in some ways words aren't necessary because it's the worst thing that's ever happened. My worst nightmare has already happened. The worst day of my life is behind me. Anything else is small potatoes compared to the death of my son. But in those early weeks and months, when you're just alternate between numbness and desperation for comfort, for somebody to put some words around what has happened, what is meaning can there be in the death of someone that you love so dearly, that was so amazing? And believe it or not, one of the things that brought me comfort, somebody put this in my hands. It's the National Strategy for Suicide Prevention. And it's 150 pages, and I devoured it as though it were bread for my soul. And you could say, how in the world could a document of a national strategy for suicide prevention bring any comfort to your heart in the loss of your son? Well, what I can tell you is that it comforted me to know that there were good people working with all that they had to make sure that other families did not endure the torment and the torture of the loss of suicide, the loss of someone they loved. And what we are doing in Orange County is there's a collection of really good people who are working as hard as they can with all that they have, with the gifts, with the experience, with the knowledge, with the life moments that they have gone through, to make sure that other families don't lose a loved one to suicide, to make sure that those living with mental illness find the access to the care that they need, so that our children, our little babies, our little toddlers, little ones can have a mental illness. Matthew was mentally ill from the time he was a toddler. We just didn't know it. He was 7 when he was diagnosed with depression, but he had been depressed for years. We just didn't know it. We just thought he was different. We just thought he would outgrow it. We thought that it was a stage, a phase. It never crossed our minds that mental illness could be part of what was happening to our sweet boy. So for the children in Orange County, to the little ones, to the teenagers, to the men and the women living sometimes deaths of despair, there are good people in Orange County who are working really hard to interrupt that cycle, to bring comfort, to bring healing, to bring hope. So I'm proud to be a part of that Orange County Behavioral Health Coalition that Matt talked about. We sometimes jokingly call ourselves the Coalition of the Willing. We don't call ourselves the coalition of the particularly intelligent or a coalition of the particularly brilliant or gifted, but we do call ourselves the coalition of the willing, because each of us is willing to put our time, our energy, our money, our thoughts, our prayers in these efforts. My friend Patrick Kennedy, former congressman from Rhode Island, says there is no health without mental health. So when we talk about improving the mental health here in Orange County, we're talking about actually raising the health of every one of our citizens. There is no health if there is no mental health. Now, the faith community, as Matt mentioned, is who I represent on this coalition of the willing. I can't speak for everybody. I don't even pretend to be able to speak for everyone in the faith community, but I am one voice. And the reason that the faith community is so important to this fight, you might think, well, this is where the hospitals, this is where the professionals need to get involved, this is where the business community, this is where the insurance companies, this is where the hospital systems, this is where those who are living with mental illness, those are the people that need to try and fix the broken mental health care system that exists in our nation. And that's true. There's a part for each one, but there's also a part for the faith community. There is work that only the faith community can do. There are some things that the faith community can bring to this fight that nobody else can. And so I want to spend what little time I have here just talking to you particularly about the faith community, because I know many of you are part of this parish, you're part of another parish, you're part of another church somewhere, another you're Jewish or Muslim, you're representing all different parts of the faith community. And I want to convince you why you matter and why what you bring to this fight is invaluable and cannot be replaced by anyone else. In 2008, there was a study by the American Religious Identification Survey was conducted, and they found that 70% of American adults identified as Christians. All across our nation, about 76% of American adults identified themselves as Christians. 4% of American adults identified themselves as either Jewish, Muslim, or Buddhist. So what that says, at least according to that one survey, is that 80% of our fellow Americans in some way are connected in a faith community. And in 350,000 faith communities scattered across the United States, that means that there is some representative of the faith community, some church, some mosque, some synagogue in every corner of our nation. The faith community is everywhere. And so when we also combine the fact that the faith community, 80% of Americans identify with one major of the faith groups, one of the major faith groups, and that there are 350,000 congregations scattered across our nation. And then you hear that 25% of those who are in some kind of a mental health crisis will reach out first to their priest, to their pastor, to their rabbi, to their imam, before they will talk to a medical professional. That tells us that we have an opportunity to do something significant in this fight, to do something that is unique, something that will be effective. I've come up with an acrostic that I've been sharing for quite a while now. It's based on the word church, because sometimes people look at our church, Saddleback Church, and if you know anything about Saddleback Church, we've been here 38 years in Orange County. We're kind of a big church, and sometimes people look at our church and they think, well, of course you're doing something about mental illness. You're a big church. But so many people, in fact, the vast majority of those 350,000 faith communities are tiny. They're less than 100 people. And so what I want to share with you is what can a faith community of less than 100 people do, not just what can the big churches. This is a big church here, but what can the little churches do? This is not work that is just resolved for the big guys. So using the acrostic church, I want to tell you it doesn't require any money. Everything I'm going to say to you requires not a penny, doesn't require any staff or hiring anybody, and doesn't require any training. And so that puts it within the reach of every single faith community. So using that acrostic church, the first C stands for care for and support those living with mental illness and their families. How much money does it take to have a heart of compassion? How much money does it cost to care, to actually care for someone who is hurting or suffering with a mental illness? It doesn't cost anything. It costs absolutely nothing. It is not out of the reach. What it costs us is our own selfishness. It costs a decision of our will to say, yes, I will care. Yes, I will become a person of compassion. Yes, I will be a voice for those who are living with mental illness. You don't have to love somebody with a mental illness. You don't have to be somebody with a mental illness to have a mental illness, to care for people who have a mental illness. And it doesn't cost anything. It is simply a decision. And once we make a decision that this is going to be a congregation that cares for those that are living with mental illness, I'm going to personally be a person who cares for those who are living with a mental illness, suddenly things begin to happen. All kinds of amazing things happen when we make a decision of our will to open our hearts to become compassionate. The thing about this is that this is in the mandate of the faith community. Government is not required to have compassion for its citizens. Government is required by law to do certain things, but having a compassionate heart for us as citizens is not the mandate of our government. It's not the mandate of the medical profession. We want the medical profession to care about us, and we always love it when we find a healthcare provider who also has that great bedside manner, but there's nothing that says you have to be a caring and compassionate person to be a part of the medical community. But to be a part of the faith community, it's in our DNA. It is in our mandate. It's in our charter. It is the words of God himself that we are to be his representatives in this world. We are to care for others as he has cared for us. So the government can get by with not necessarily caring. The medical profession can get by with not necessarily having great bedside manners and tender hearts. The faith community, the church, cannot. We cannot name the name of Jesus Christ and have cold, hard hearts toward those who are suffering. So the first thing that every church can do is to care for and support those who have a mental illness. Second is to help with practical needs. Sometimes you get nothing back from your parish, from your church, from your community when you say that you have a mental illness. It takes real courage to disclose that. When I had breast cancer about 15 years ago, man, the people in my church tripped over themselves trying to prepare meals for my family. They took care of my kids. They scrubbed my toilet. They took my clothes to the dry cleaners. But if somebody in your parish, in your church, says to you, I was just diagnosed this week with bipolar disorder, how many times do you think there will be people lining up to bring them a casserole? How many times do you think there will be people that will say, listen, can I watch your kids while you go to your doctor's appointment? Can my husband and I come over and, I realize you're just not doing so great these days. Can we come over and paint that fence for you? Offer practical help. That is within the reach of every single one of us. I have a friend, Amy Simpson, who's written a great book on mental illness, which has escaped me at the moment. I can't think of the name of her book, but she says that mental illness is the no casserole illness. We can change that. And then the U in that acrostic of church is to utilize volunteers. Every single organization is starving for volunteers. Every NGO, every philanthropic group, every volunteer organization, Red Cross, you name it, they're all dying for volunteers. Look around. This space is filled with smart, gifted, kind, loving people who, if they could find the motivation to give back, volunteers are sitting in every one of our faith communities every weekend. They're filling those pews. All we need to do is to harness their passions, their abilities, their compassion, and put them to work on behalf of those who are suffering. The R is to remove the stigma. This is probably the most powerful and the most life-changing thing that a faith community can do. When I was an advocate full-time for people living with HIV and traveled around the world, I got used to people coming up to me and whispering in my ear, "I have AIDS. I'm HIV positive." They whispered in my ear because the stigma around HIV is lethal, truly. People can be killed for being positive. Women can be thrown from their homes if they're found to be HIV positive. Children can no longer play with other children. You can be fired from your job. It is a terrible thing, the stigma around HIV in our world. Thankfully, we've come a long way here in the United States. But you know what I hear now as an advocate for those living with suicidal thoughts, suicide prevention, those with mental illness? I now have people come up and whisper in my ear, "I have an eating disorder. I have borderline personality disorder. I have anxiety that absolutely cripples me." Why do they whisper? Because there's still a stigma around mental illness. We don't understand that illness is illness. Illness is illness. And when one part of the body doesn't work, the whole body is not in health. And so when you remove the stigma, when you say to someone, when you, as I saw today in the Mass, I don't know how many of you were at the Mass at 5:30 today, but I was thrilled. I wanted to stand up and cheer. I figured it was probably not a good thing to do, but I really wanted to stand up and cheer when I heard the word depression mentioned, when I heard the word addiction mentioned in prayer, when I heard the prayers for those who are living with physical, mental, and spiritual maladies and illnesses. It's like, yes, right on. Yes. Dispel the stigma, knock it down, get rid of it. When people know that they are loved and accepted by God and by those who represent Him, their lives take on a fullness. You can get through anything if you know that you are accepted and you are loved. Church should be the last place you ever have to whisper anything about your life. If there should be a safe sanctuary, if there should be a safe sanctuary on this planet, it should be the church. It should be the safest place on earth. And then C, I'll go fast, sorry. Kind of froth at the mouth a little. Is to collaborate with the community. And it's exactly what's happening right now. You and in your parish, in your faith community, in your church, may or may not know much about mental illness or suicide prevention. You might really not know much about it at all. But there are people in our community, some of them are represented here tonight, who are experts, who know, who understand. They're proficient at it. They've studied. They've learned. They've learned how to apply it to people's lives and to invite them to come in and speak and train and educate. It's such a beautiful way to collaborate with the community and the faith community, with the medical community and the faith community. And then suddenly, those of us in the faith community who are not experts are educated. We're informed. We know what to look for. We don't have to be afraid when somebody says that they're feeling depressed. We don't have to go into this panic mode of, oh my gosh, what will happen if they say that they're thinking of taking their life? I wouldn't have the faintest idea what to do. Because suddenly we've been trained. We've heard it. Somebody who knows more than we do has educated us. Collaborate with the community. And then the last H in that acrostic is to offer hope. Because nobody can offer hope like the faith community. Nobody can. I've already said that the government and the medical community and the business community are not necessarily tasked with showing compassion or giving hope, but we are. We are. It's job number one for us to offer hope to people. We offer hope, and what I think what I love so much is we don't even just offer hope for the life to come. Sometimes we've gotten really caught up in the life to come, which, believe me, if heaven wasn't real, I would be a desperate woman today, because if I didn't, okay, I'm just going to tell you, the resurrection of Jesus Christ changed everything. And because Jesus is alive, my son Matthew is alive, and because they're both alive, I will be alive too one day. Okay, so, but I have not only hope, I realize not everybody's coming from the same place. So I want to just be careful and respectful of that. But how can I not say that Jesus is alive? Okay, so where I was going with that is there's not only hope for the future, there's hope for right now. The faith community can be the group that says, listen, you may have burned the bridges in your family because those living with mental illness, particularly severe mental illness, or chronic suicidality, or suicidal thoughts, or substance use disorder, believe me, they burn a lot of bridges. A lot of relationships get broken and destroyed along the way. But the faith community needs to be a place where there are brothers and sisters who say, whether you are ever healed, whether you are cured, whether you're in recovery, whether you get this all together or not, whether anything ever changes in your life, there's a group of people here who will not walk away from you. We will not walk away from you. We will walk with you. No matter what happens, no matter what doesn't happen. You are safe here, and there is hope, because we will be with you. One of the most powerful examples, and I'll close with this, for me, that I've come to see in the last year, maybe it's everybody else is familiar with it, and I'm the last one to know, and I know you can't see it from this tiny little space, but I'll show it to you if you want to look at it. It's Japanese pottery, and it's called kintsugi. And this pottery is typically if you break a mug, from your dishes, you break something, what do? We typically just throw it away. It's broken, it's in pieces, it's no longer beautiful, it's no longer functional. But in kintsugi art, a broken vase, a broken glass, a broken bowl is put back together very carefully, tenderly, and beautifully with a combination of gold and epoxy, because the belief is that you can be broken and beautiful at the same time. And those of us, I live with depression. My husband has had panic attacks for a very long time. My 3 children all lived with anxiety. 2 are still alive, and anxiety and depression. And my 1 son had serious mental illness. And I have witnessed in my life with myself, my husband, and my children that you can be broken and beautiful, and that the faith community offers that hope. It's our job, it's our mandate, it's our privilege to walk alongside people in their brokenness and say, you are loved, you matter, your story matters. And yes, you may be a little cracked, but you are beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. That was wonderful, so well said. Mother Teresa of Calcutta is one of my heroes, and thank you for reminding me of her. That was beautiful. Our next speaker, Erin Cariati, medical doctor, is an associate professor of psychiatry at UC Irvine School of Medicine and director of the medical ethics program at UC Health. He serves as chairman of the medical ethics committees at UC Hospital and the California Department of State Hospitals. Dr. Cariati graduated from the University of Notre Dame in philosophy and pre-medical sciences and earned his medical degree from Georgetown University, and followed up with his residency training in psychiatry at UCI. He's authored books and articles for professional and lay audiences on bioethics, social science, psychiatry, and religion. His work has been published in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Times, and he's been on CNN, Fox News, and NPR. We're really proud to have him here tonight, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you all for being here tonight. I'd like to thank my friend, Matt Holzman, who is tireless in his efforts to improve mental health care in Orange County. And each one of you came out here tonight has a stake in this. And it's so edifying for me now to see some movement in the church, to begin to reach out to individuals and families who have been impacted by mental illness. And what I'm going to talk about tonight, I'm going to spend about 20 minutes talking about an important document that will be published in a few weeks. I was hoping that it was going to be published on time for this event tonight, but it looks like it's still another week or two in press. The Catholic bishops of the state of California are publishing a pastoral letter on caring for those who suffer from mental illness and on supporting their families. And this is a letter that is addressed, of course, to Catholics, but indeed to all people of goodwill, to our fellow Christians, to other people of faith, and to people of no particular faith who care about and who have a stake in improving mental health care. So it's an honor to be with you here tonight. It's an honor to be able to speak after my friend Kay. And what I want to do is highlight 6 of the themes that we're going to read about in this pastoral letter. So I'm certainly not going to read the whole thing. I'm not going to summarize the whole thing. But there are 6 key themes that the letter hits upon, and I just want to provide a brief commentary on those tonight. And if there's time later, if there's time for Q&A, we can get into more of the details about that. The other thing I'll say about this letter is that it's not just going to be a sort of statement from on high. It's going to be a very practical document, because included with it at each diocesan level in the various regions of California, when the letter is published online, there will be local resources included with it, links to resources, links to models of effective programs that have already been implemented at various places, that if someone feels called to start a support group at their parish or an outreach group at their parish, there will be some very helpful resources with this letter that can sort of give people ideas and get them going. And of course, there will be resources for individuals struggling from mental illness in terms of where can they get help and where can their families get the help and support that they need. So I'm so pleased that that our bishops here in California have decided to do this, and of course, so pleased with all the work that's been done with our Protestant brethren, Rick Warren being at the forefront of that, Rick and Kay, but so many others as well. The bishops of California, in their letter, recognize that ministering to those who suffer from mental illness is an essential part of the pastoral care of the church. We don't need to look very far to encounter our brothers and sisters who struggle with mental illness. Indeed, we're all psychologically wounded to one degree or another, as Kay reminded us. Wounded by our own weaknesses and vulnerabilities, wounded collectively by the effects of original sin. Therefore, when we speak about mental illness, it's important to begin by understanding there's no us and them, right? There's only we. Though it may not be as apparent, or to some people as familiar as other general medical problems, mental illness is equally important and uniquely challenging and burdensome. It seems to strike deep within the human soul, because it impacts a person's thoughts, their emotions, and their behaviors, not just their bodily functioning, although it impacts that certainly as well. Mental illness impacts all aspects of a person's life, including a person's relationship with God. The first theme that the bishops highlight is that we have a duty to reach out to individuals with mental illness, because this is what Christ did. Christ calls us to attend to anyone who suffers, including those who suffer from mental illness, and to give them hope and to provide healing and support. Our Lord healed countless afflictions of body, mind, and spirit, and as Catholics in imitation of him, as Christians in imitation of our Lord, we're called to do the same. We know that all people are created in the image and likeness of God, and therefore a person's dignity, value, or worth cannot be diminished one iota by any condition, including by mental illness. Every baptized member of the church has unique gifts to offer the church. Everyone has a place in the body of Christ. As Kay mentioned, individuals with mental illness often suffer in silence, hidden and unrecognized by others. She used the example of having cancer and the outpouring of support from the neighborhood, the parish, family, friends. But what about the person with depression, with crippling anxiety, with bipolar disorder, with an eating disorder? Not only do they receive inadequate support because of the completely unjust and unwarranted social stigma that sadly still surrounds mental illness, not only do they receive a lack of support, but if they try to reach out, if they try to disclose, they're often met with misunderstanding, and efforts to help them too frequently miss the mark. Those living with a mental illness should never have to bear these burdens alone, nor should their families, who often struggle heroically year in and year out to try to assist them. The second theme that the bishops talk about is the sheer scope and burden of mental illness in our society. According to the National Institute for Mental Health, 1 in 5 adults, 1 in 5 in the U.S. has suffered from a mental disorder over the past year. 10 million Americans, 1 in 25, have a mental illness that is severe enough to cause serious functional impairment in terms of their ability to function educationally, occupationally, socially, in their family life. 20% of adolescents currently have or previously had a serious and debilitating mental disorder that impacted their schooling or other activities. Mental, neurological, and substance use disorders are the single largest source of disability in the United States. In American society today, sadly, we're seeing rising rates of depression and anxiety, disproportionately impacting young people. I just gave a talk at J. Sarah High School the other night on this very issue. Also, in the last 2 decades in the United States, we've seen an alarming illness in what social scientists now call deaths of despair, death by suicide, drug overdose, or alcohol-related illnesses. The rise in suicide is affecting both men and women in every age group up to the age of 75. The suicide rate among 10 to 15-year-old girls since 1999 has tripled. Suicide is now the second leading cause of death in the United States among adolescents and young adults. The second leading cause of, it's the 10th leading cause of death overall in the United States. Obviously, these are trends that seriously impact our communities, our families, our faith communities. These are crises of our time, and they're an urgent call to all of us to respond. We must respond. In this context, we also can't neglect the grave problem of addiction. We cannot abandon those who struggle to free themselves from drug abuse or from alcohol dependence. We know that addictions often go hand in hand with other mental illnesses like mood disorders, schizophrenia, bipolar, and so forth. Recovery usually requires that we attend to both problems. People who are wounded by heartbreaking loss or abuse or neglect, overwhelming loneliness, often find themselves susceptible to the slavery of substance dependence or other addictive behaviors. Also in this context, the bishops explicitly acknowledge the current opioid crisis, which represents the worst drug crisis in terms of morbidity and mortality that our country has ever faced. Worse than the cocaine epidemic of the 1980s, far worse than the meth epidemic of the 1990s. Drug overdose is now the leading cause of death for Americans under the age of 50. People are dying every day of opiate overdose. This is an enormous and complex problem. It's not going to be solved by one simple or ready-made solution. But we have to muster the collective will to address this crisis. And in this, we are motivated not just out of solidarity for our neighbor, but specifically out of Christian love, a desire for justice and a desire to love our neighbor as Christ loves us. Another widespread related problem that is contributing to the depression, the anxiety, the substance dependence, it's not a mental illness in and of itself, but the bishops do mention also the problem of loneliness. In 1980, if you asked Americans, do you have anyone in your life with whom you can talk about important things? 1 in 5, 20% of them said, no, I have no one in my life, whether a family member, a friend, someone at church, someone at work, with whom I can discuss important personal things. Today, that number has doubled. 40% of Americans, 4 in 10, say that they have no one with whom they can discuss important things. These troubling trends have many and very complex social and cultural causes, changes in family structure and family fluidity, the fragmentation of social life, the tendency for us to compartmentalize our lives, novel technologies that are contributing to that when they are misused. All of this has a significantly negative impact on our mental and physical health. The third theme that the bishops discuss in the letter: those suffering mental illness should never be stigmatized or judged. There's no shame in receiving a diagnosis of a psychiatric disorder. There's a need for education in our communities to remove this unjust prejudice and stigma often associated with mental illness. Mental illness is neither a moral failure nor a character defect. It's not a sign of insufficient faith or weakness of will. Indeed, we can look back on our own tradition and see many great Americans, many great men and women of faith, of strong character, of heroic holiness, who suffered at times from serious mental illnesses like depression or bipolar, from Abraham Lincoln and Winston Churchill to St. Teresa of Lisieux, St. Benedict Joseph Labre in the Catholic tradition, St. Francis of Rome, and many others. As Pastor Rick Warren likes to say, your chemistry is not your character, and your illness is not your identity. The bishops quote Rick. They're very proud of that phrase. Ecumenism at its finest, right? So we see that mental illness is a deep source of suffering for so many. As Christians, we have a distinctive perspective on suffering, on the problem of pain. Suffering, we know, is ultimately a mystery. And Christianity's answer to suffering is likewise mysterious, for the answer is Jesus Christ on the cross. We believe that the Son of God became a man in order to suffer with us and for us. In his passion, he had compassion on all those who suffer in body and mind. Except for sin, Christ experienced everything that we experience, including emotional and mental anguish. Consider his agony in the garden just prior to his arrest. So our Christian faith does not promise a life free from suffering or affliction. We shouldn't expect that prayer or scripture reading or reception of the sacraments will cure mental disorders or alleviate all forms of psychological suffering. The Christian faith and the sacramental life of the church offer us the hope and the spiritual strength to endure whatever God permits in our life. The things that are easy and the things that are very, very difficult. but we recognize that not all afflictions can be avoided, and sadly, not all illnesses can be cured. So we have a duty as Christians to always reach out to the sick, to accompany them, to do everything that we can to diminish their suffering. When possible, we need to cure, but always we need to care. The fourth theme: the church, healthcare professionals, scientific researchers, patients, families, their loved ones, all of us need to work together to make things better. The bishops acknowledge and applaud the many innovative programs that have been launched in recent years at our churches and our communities, public, private, that are aimed at assisting people with mental illness and their families, such as the event here tonight would be a good example of that. As I mentioned, their letter will include links to many of these models and many of these resources at the local level. These are a good starting point. But they also call upon the talents, expertise, energy, dedication, passion, care, concern of every one of us, professionals, non-professionals, to contribute to new and more creative, more effective ways of addressing these challenging issues. Everyone has something to contribute to these efforts. It's very important for us to understand. Each one of us, every person in this room can contribute. Back in 2003, Pope John Paul II gave an address, a talk on the theme of depression. And I think his words regarding depression can actually be applied to any mental illness. And he was speaking not primarily to medical or mental health professionals. He was speaking to ordinary people that wanted to help. He says this disease is often accompanied by an existential and spiritual crisis that leads to an inability to perceive the meaning of life. And he went on to stress how both professionals and non-professionals motivated by Christian charity and compassion can help individuals struggling with a mental illness. He says, quote, "The role of those who care for depressed persons and who do not have a specifically therapeutic task," right? They're not a therapist or a doctor. Their role consists above all in helping individuals to recover their self-esteem, confidence in their own abilities, interest in the future, the desire to live. It's therefore important, he says, to stretch out a hand to the sick, to make them perceive the tenderness of God, to integrate them into a community of faith and life in which they can feel accepted, understood, supported, respected. In a word, in which they can love and be loved. So it's time for us to build bridges. Bridges between science and religion, between healthcare and pastoral care, clergy, health professionals, families, mental health advocates. All of us can work together with a both and rather than an either or approach to psychological and spiritual healing. We welcome all the advances in science and medicine that can help individuals with mental illness. But we also recognize that for all of its wonderful achievements, science and medicine alone can't provide us with all the solutions to the problems that are raised by mental illness. Indeed, science can't answer our deepest and most perplexing human questions. Why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? Why have I suffered this enormous loss? Why is God permitting this terrible illness? These are ultimately, I would suggest to you, spiritual or religious questions. They can't be ignored, they can't be stifled. And it's precisely our Christian faith that offers hope, a hope that speaks to these deep longings. That even in this life, with all of its adversity, with all of its pain, with all of its struggles, we can still find some measure of joy and peace. Now, some Christians harbor suspicions about psychiatry or clinical psychology. They question perhaps the compatibility of these approaches with the Christian faith. The bishops affirm, and I would reaffirm, that there's no legitimate reason for this. Medical science has discovered many useful treatments to help those with mental illness, medications, psychotherapy, other procedures. I make use of these. I prescribe these every day to patients. And likewise, medical science is discovering, and there's a growing body of research that's demonstrating the health benefits, including mental health benefits, of practices like prayer and meditation, of participation in a religious community or religious worship, in cultivating Christian virtues like gratitude and forgiveness. Now, these spiritual practices do not prevent or entirely cure mental illnesses. That's not what I'm suggesting. But the research shows that they can reduce the risk of relapse. They can assist people in recovery. So modern medicine is rediscovering that there's this deep connection, right, between the body and the soul. The fifth theme in the letter is that we must meet and attend to those in need wherever they are. To reach those who struggle with mental illness, we've got to strengthen the role of our churches, our small groups, our parish communities, but we also have to be able to move beyond our zone of comfort and familiarity, right? Move beyond the walls of our churches, where there may be some cultures who repress or ignore mental health issues. We need to help them to acknowledge the reality of mental illness, to open themselves to the available resources for help and healing. Those who struggle from, especially from severe and persistent mental illnesses, are among the most misunderstood, ignored, unjustly stigmatized members of our society. They are the poorest of the poor. And for them, our communities, our parishes, should be places of refuge and healing, not places of rejection or judgment. Our outreach needs to be, as I suggested, proactive, right? Not sitting comfortably behind sort of the walls of our churches. And managing crises when they arise is just one component. This kind of work is going to require education, learning, some training, but it requires above all, and most importantly, dedication from people who care, from people who want to do something about the problems that I've sketched. And let's consider that people who are living with a mental illness know better than anyone else what it's like to live with a mental illness. So they need to be more than sort of the passive recipients of the ministrations of other people, right? They need to be involved in the process from beginning to end. And those who have progressed along the road of recovery and healing, with all the trials and hardships that go along with that, these are precisely the individuals who can be an enormous resource for their neighbors who may not be as far along, perhaps, on that road to recovery, right? A real and believable sign of hope. To hear their stories, which means we can't stifle those, which means we have to talk about them openly, honestly. I'm very pleased to tell you that the bishops acknowledge very, very frankly in this statement that in spite of the many individuals and institutions that try to provide good mental health care, the mental health system in California is broken at almost every level. We're failing our brothers and sisters. We're failing their families. Our jails and prisons, our city streets are filled with individuals who suffer from mental illness. Prisons have become the nation's largest mental health care facilities. Estimates of between 10 and 25% of individuals who are incarcerated today have a serious mental illness, compared to 5% of the general population. A conservative estimate would suggest that 1/3 of homeless persons struggle with a severe mental disorder. This is not acceptable in a decent society. This is not acceptable. We have to find more just, more humane, more equitable solutions. We've got to roll up our sleeves. We've got to get involved in the lives of other people. The clergy need to remain close to the daily problems of ordinary people, to be available and really ready to assist. Right? As Pope Francis likes to say, the shepherds have to smell like the sheep. Francis also talks about creating what he calls a culture of encounter, where we don't pass by people in a hurry without noticing them, without recognizing how they may be struggling or suffering. It's easy to do this with those who are suffering from an illness like depression or anxiety, addiction, psychological traumas, loneliness or isolation, because their suffering may be hidden. Right? It's not as apparent as the person with the broken arm. We've got to get to know them, to listen to them, to befriend them. That's not because we have the answers to all of their problems, not because we can fix anything, but it's because that friendship, that care, that concern is precisely what people who are suffering need most. Yes, they need medicine. Yes, they need professional help in many instances. But they need friendship. They need solidarity. And these efforts, we should acknowledge, at times are going to be hindered by a fear of engaging and interacting with those, especially those who have a more severe mental illness. Their sometimes unpredictable or unusual behavior that we see with undertreated or untreated mental disorders can trigger these kinds of fears, making it perhaps more difficult for us to acknowledge the common humanity that we share. So when these kinds of fears arise, let's recall Christ's approach, our Lord's approach to those who were different, who were other, who were marginalized, who were at the peripheries of society in his day. Let's also remember John's word from his first letter. There is no fear in love, he says, but perfect love casts out fear. Finally, the sixth theme, the last theme that the bishops address in their letter, is a word on the heartbreaking tragedy of suicide, which Kay Warren has already spoken about this evening. And they're particularly concerned, again, about the rising rates of suicide among young people. They want to offer a word of consolation as well to anyone who's lost a loved one to suicide. Talked about the statistics already, but we know that most deaths by suicide are associated with some form of mental illness, major depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, personality disorders, addictions. Those who have lost a loved one to mental illness suffer exquisitely painful wounds. They're especially in need of our love and support for reasons that are beyond our comprehension. Some individuals suffer from mental illnesses that prove difficult to treat or impossible to cure. These illnesses, as we know, impact not just a person's moods or their feelings, but their thinking, even to the point where they feel entirely trapped and can see no way out of their anguish. Mental illness can impair a person's ability to reason clearly, to see a future. It adversely impacts or completely impairs, in some cases, a person's sound judgment. Sometimes mental illness proves fatal. The church, of course, acknowledges that suicide is contrary to the will of God who gave us life. But at the same time, the Catholic Church clearly teaches in the Catechism that grave psychological disturbances, anguish, or fear of hardship, suffering, and so forth can diminish the responsibility of the one who attempts or completes suicide. The Catechism goes on to instruct us that we should not despair of the eternal salvation of persons who have taken their own lives. It says, in ways known to Him alone, in God's mysterious workings, He can provide them the opportunity for repentance. The Church prays for individuals who have taken their own lives, who are considering taking their own lives, who are tempted, and of course for their families, their loved ones, who need particular care and attention, usually for very long periods of time. Not only have they lost someone who's so dear to them, and they're grieving deeply, but their intense grief is complicated by feelings of confusion, shame, perhaps anger, perhaps guilt, replaying the last conversation that I had with my loved one in my mind, wondering if there's more that perhaps we could have done to see this, to recognize it, or if we recognized it, could more have been done to help? With this kind of burden, those who have lost a loved one to suicide often also feel misunderstood in ways that other grieving people may not. They may feel that they can't discuss with anyone the circumstances surrounding the death of the loved one. So it takes a lot of courage, but we have to convey to them that we're not afraid to open up this kind of difficult and sensitive conversation, that they don't need to feel ashamed to talk about their anguish, to talk about the loss, to talk about the complicated feelings wrapped up in that. Healing in these situations happens only very slowly, but we must be willing to walk that long road with people. Behind each one of those numbers, those statistics that I mentioned earlier, the 43,000 suicide deaths a year in the United States, is a family who's been forever impacted. And so our friendship, our efforts to console, the pastoral care we provide for individuals in those circumstances has to be ongoing and unconditional. We can't forget about them a year or two down the road. It doesn't work that way. We're living in a fallen, broken world. Each of us is broken to one degree or another. And yet we know that God never allows us to suffer alone. In the incarnation of Jesus Christ, God descended to our level. He comes to meet us in our suffering, our illness, our affliction. On the cross, our Lord suffered not just our physical afflictions, but our mental anguish as well. Christ's kingdom has not yet reached its fullness, but we know in faith that it will at the end of time. On that day, all things will be made new. The bishops closed the document with a very beautiful thought that I'd like to share with you in closing out my talk. They say, just as Christ never abandons anyone, so also the church never abandons those who suffer from mental illness. Our Christian faith provides us with this consolation and this firm hope, a hope which strengthens our resolve. In eternity with God, every beautiful thing in our lives that is now unfinished will be completed. All the good that is scattered will be gathered together. Everything that is lost will be found. All hopes that are now thwarted will be realized, and all that is broken will finally be restored. Thank you for your attention.
All right, so you heard a lot of the why in the first section of this. Now you're going to hear about the how. And we've got a big how going here. We have Marshall Moncrief and John Lyerly from the coalition who are going to speak, and I will let Mr. Sanders, speak next.
So we have a tag team up next. Marshall Moncrief is a licensed family therapist, and he's also the Regional Director of Mental Health and Wellness for Providence St. Joseph Health, Southern California. And with him is John Lyerly. John Lyerly is the president of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, which I'm sure you've heard of before. And Matt Holzman is the government liaison of NAMI, of Orange County affiliate. John has lived experience as a family member with multiple loved ones with a mental illness. He is a co-teacher of NAMI's Family to Family and provider signature education programs. John has been active with NAMI Orange County for over a decade. He joined the board of directors in 2014 and was elected president in 2016. Now, NAMI is the nation's largest grassroots organization dedicated to the support of families and loved ones in their mental health journeys through education, support, and advocacy. NAMI Orange County provides 7 signature educational programs presented by NAMI-trained teachers for persons living with mental health diagnoses, for their family members, and for mental health care professionals. Support groups are led through Orange County by NAMI-trained facilitators. NAMI Orange County operates a daily warm line. It's a hotline resource and support call center for all residents. And once again, if you want to join the Our Lady Queen of Angels Mental Health Committee, you can sign up at the sheet over there. And you'll never walk alone, and as I like to say, your ability to love somebody else doesn't come from them. So I just love the speakers thus far, and looking forward to this. So John and Marshall, come on up.
Hi, guys. Let me say first, this is, we're all experiencing right now together a major win. This is a win. So I've been in our health system since 2004. And I remember when I got there, I was about 6 months in, and the CEO of St. Joe's Orange at the time, who I reported to, said, "We've got this great thing going. We're going to do a mental health talk for the community. We've got flyers out and the whole thing, and we had this great room about this size with speakers, and there was banners and the whole thing to direct traffic and get people in." And I came really prepared, and I got up here just like this, and there were 3 of you sitting here. And that's true, and we had a good time, but it was just the 4 of us. So it's really cool to have the 100 some odd of us. Oh, thank you. I'll try to, yeah, so, right, so here we are. Awesome. So things are moving forward, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm from Providence St. Joseph Health. I oversee mental health and substance abuse for the Southern California region. My dyad partner, Clayton Chow, is here. And but I'm not here talking on behalf of Providence St. Joseph Health. I'm here talking on behalf of the Orange County Coalition. So there's about 50 other people that could be up here talking. I just was the last to step backwards. And so I'm glad to be here with you. But because I am from Providence St. Joseph Health, a Catholic, not-for-profit healthcare organization, and because we're sitting here today at Queen of Angels, I wanted to start off sharing something with you. So a teacher of mine, his name's Dad, connected me with a teacher of his, whose name is St. Francis of Assisi, who became a teacher of mine. He's got a bunch of good stuff to say, and this is one of the things that he says that's resonated with me, the prayer of St. Francis. I get the sense some of you in this room might be familiar with it. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is error, truth. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. Thanks so much for joining me in that. As a person on my own spiritual trajectory, hopefully there's an evolutionary trajectory to it, this has become really important for me. As a licensed clinician, it speaks to me in a little bit of a different way, although equally important. I'll try to keep this up here. I can tell it makes a difference. Those words stick out and poke at me. And as a licensed clinician, hatred translates in my vernacular to feeling of excessive guilt and As a clinician, injury and error translate to something of feeling of worthlessness. Doubt translates to feeling of hopelessness. Despair and darkness, recurrent thoughts of death, sadness, loss of interest and pleasure. So what I just walked you through is the diagnostic criteria of depression. And so for a person on my own spiritual trajectory, the prayer of St. Francis speaks to me. As a clinician who wakes up every day to address mental health disorders, this prayer speaks to me. And our role together, and the reason we all showed up tonight, our mission together, is that part of it. And so that's what we're trying to exercise. So thanks again for being here. When I got recruited, I was at one of the hospitals, one of our local hospitals, and I got recruited by our CEO at the time, his name's Rick Afable, to come to the region with Clayton and do mental health. And I showed up, and I was so excited to tell Rick the stuff I was working on. So I've got this awesome program, Rick, and here's what we're going to do. And I told him all about it, and he listened intently, and he said, Marshall, that sounds great. It sounds like it's going to take a lot of effort and energy, too. And if you spend this first year successfully standing that program up, you will have failed. I said, oh, okay. And he said, my understanding is that the mental health system, building on Dr. Cariati's comments, is broken. And if we're going to do something meaningful, I want you and Dr. Chow outside of this hospital. I don't want to see you guys. Get out there and let's do something bigger than just our hospital-based programs. So that was our charge. So we went out and we've been talking to people and working with people and doing a whole bunch of stuff and came back to report to Rick, hey, we got good news, we got bad news, and then we got more good news, and I dropped an F-bomb in there. I'm sorry, I ate so many cookies, I have to keep... The good news is it's not broken. The bad news is the system of mental health doesn't exist. There is none. There's no system. In fact, the first slide I want to share with you is a schematic I spent a ton of time on showing you today's mental health system. So spend a minute on it, soak it in. There it is. And then I dropped the F-bomb, and I know we're in a place of worship, but I want you to have an honest accounting of what happened. And I said, Rick, this whole thing is fragmented. Because this doesn't mean that there's bad stuff going on or no stuff going on. In fact, there are zillions of absolutely phenomenal things going on in Orange County, and a bunch we have to be proud of, but they're happening in fragmented, acupuncture-like pin pokes that don't have collective impact. And so what Rick's vision was, and what others who came into this thing to create this coalition of the willing saw, was, boy, we don't have to build a system from nothing, and this was the, again, good news. We've got all sorts of stuff. We've just got to get out our needle and our yarn and start weaving it all together into some kind of meaningful system that has collective impact. And so that's what we're going to talk to you about. So, if we're going to do this, we need, I get antsy and I walk around, but I also have to go back and click this button. We need a whole person, whole system, whole community approach to this thing if we're going to make this happen. We need the whole orange. We need a coalition of the willing, just like Kay described. And we put out an invitation and a whole bunch of people showed up. So up about 1 o'clock, you've got United Way and NAMI and Jamboree Housing. Helen's here somewhere. And so all the usual players that are out doing good all the time, They, of course, showed up. They were the first ones to get there. And then our academic institutions showed up. By the way, not everybody there is represented. It's too big. I just grabbed the stuff that was first to mind. Chapman, UCI, CSUF. And then our faith community showed up. And then our public health agencies showed up. And then our health systems all came together. And as somebody who's been a part of the St. Joe's system for a while and the Hoag system, we squabble all the time with Memorial. Not here, not now. We're all in the pool. And the cool thing about the way the health system showed up is it wasn't just the mental health nerds like me. The chief executive showed up. We've got their attention. So everybody's in on this. We'll make sure you know when the next meeting is. Love to have you there. And we came up with a vision statement. And this is it. Matt alluded to it earlier. All community members have world-class behavioral health care and support, resulting in the healthiest community in the United States. I'm sort of a wordsmith, and that gets to me just a little bit because I'd like to craft it a little tighter and that sort of thing. But Kay and John have said, you know what? Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. We're 80% there. We've got a target. Let's go. So here it is. And this is our vision. And we split ourselves sort of into 3 focus areas. Whole person, access for all. We need a whole system, fill the gaps, weave this thing together. And we need a whole community approach. We need a trusted resource. Where's the trusted front door? Already, I've had about 5 or 6 of you come up and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, don't really know where to go. That's the fragmentation we're talking about. And we're focused on 3 buckets: the fires, the future, and the infrastructure. So what's going on today? There's a whole bunch of crises out there. How are we going to address them together? And then how do we turn the spigot off so that we're not addressing fires in the same way tomorrow? And what's the unifying infrastructure that facilitates all of that? So those are the 3 columns of thought that we're bringing to the coalition. We're in all 3, but we are heavily focused right now. There's a lot of energy going into the fires. And there's a reason, because the fires have a material impact on the hospitals and health systems. They've got a material impact on our emergency responders. And most importantly, they have a very significant impact, because of the lack of integrated support system, on the people and the families that need the help. Quick little example, at Hoag Hospital, which is in our system, Providence St. Joseph Health, last year, the emergency department was on diversion for 24 hours, 7 days. Not consecutively, but in total, being on diversion means we can't take any more patients. So in total, the ER was unavailable to you all for 1 solid week. I just choose them because I have the stats in my brain. I could speak the same to any of the other hospitals. And that's because there was an enormous amount of people in psychiatric crisis in the ER. And so folks with other medical ailments weren't able to access it. Worse off, the people with the psychiatric acute condition weren't in the right environment and they weren't getting the right care. Not because the ER folks don't care. I think I see Pete back there. They care a lot. But it's not designed to meet that need. In fact, all the lights and the blaring and the sounds and the whole thing is antithetical to what the person in psychiatric crisis needs. So that's why we're addressing the fires first with a ferocious energy. We split up into 3 work groups. And in a second, I'm going to hand off to John, and he'll walk us through the work that's underway right now. We'd love to get you to jump in with us within each of these 3 work groups. So the big pool that I just showed you came together and said, we're going to create a system of care work group. We've got to design that infrastructure. We need that whole community approach. We need a public, private, academic, and faith community coming together to create a system of care, the thing that's lacking. John Lyerly stepped forward to chair that group. Brave soul. Site development group Dan Young, some of you guys might know the guy. He worked for Irvine Company for a while, so he knows a little bit about real estate and making stuff happen. He stepped up and said, I'd love to help find physical locations to facilitate this new system of care. Terrific. Dan's off and running. Helen's working with him on that stuff. And then we needed a funding group. What's going to be the new funding approach to support all of this? Mark Costa from Kaiser, he oversees Southern California for Kaiser, stepped up to co-chair that. And I just put one name each here. Matt Holzman also co-chairs that funding group. And Jaime Munoz from Social Security Agency co-chairs System of Care with John. So these are our 3 work groups that are active right now creating this new system of care. So this isn't wishful thinking, this is roll up your sleeves, we are all in, and we're going to make this thing happen. So I'm going to hand this off to John, and he's going to walk you through what's going on in each of these 3 groups.
Marshall, thanks. And I think in this tag team Huntley-Brinkley effort, we'll probably be sharing the mic back and forth. So I'm John Lyerly with NAMI Orange County. It's my good fortune to be with many who are in this audience tonight, the group of the willing, who are really leaning forward, as Kay shared with us, as Marshall just mentioned, to make a real difference, a difference that is so significant that what we aspire to is the best of mental health care for everyone in the County of Orange, on the planet. So it's a daunting but a passionate commitment that we have to really make a difference here. And your attendance here tonight is so important as you raise your awareness and then your education and become a part of this effort. It's material in our collective ability, that coalition of the willing, to make a difference. So one of the significant messages that I hope that you will take with you tonight, a word that we've heard spoken of a bit earlier this evening, hope. There is significant reason for practical and real hope. And that hope is in the progress that we are making and the future that we are going to create together. As we all continue on this journey toward wellness as family members and as peers in this challenge of mental health. So let me see, how does this progress? Is that going to do it? Yeah. So with the vision to create the best behavioral health system on planet Earth, we created a look at what would some of the pieces of that mental health care system look like. We call this the continuum of care. And at the top, at the 12 o'clock, wellness is where we want to be. And we want to do things to help not only establish wellness, but to maintain wellness. Some early intervention and prevention measures that will help there. We know that for some, at the 3 o'clock location, there will be crisis. And there needs to be significant resource, insight, understanding to be able to apply to that crisis. That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. Can we dim the forward lights, whoever has magic awareness of the right button to push? Switches here, but good luck. Does that help? Looking for one more. Oh, what do you think now? And at the 3 o'clock location on this continuum of care, this crisis location, in a moment I'll share with you one of several areas that the Orange County Coalition for Behavioral Health, that is the Coalition of the Willing, identified as a place that we need to begin and we need to act now. So as part of our vision to create the best behavioral health system on the planet, we want to accomplish a couple of things. We want to understand what some of the best practices are across the country and around the world. We also need to know what our existing capacity is, and importantly, what the gaps are. We are very willing and interested to steal shamelessly from the very best systems around, from the work that New York has done in their program called Thrive, from the work that San Antonio has done in the Haven for Hope, and like programs. But we also are going to create our own best practice work where we find a gap that needs to be filled. And so we'll talk a bit more about the crisis portion of the system of care, the continuum of care in a moment. At the 6 o'clock location, in this continuum of care, we focus on decline, acknowledging that that can and does happen in mental health journeys. At the 9 o'clock location, folks move from decline as we progress in the wellness effort into recovery. With residential and recuperative care, specialty and behavioral services. And then the ultimate intent is to move back into wellness. Notice that at the center of this continuum of care are three elements that support every aspect of the continuum of care. Navigation, we'll talk more about that, being able to navigate the behavioral health system. The very first slide that Marshall shared that was blank, that was a white screen, that's frankly how many of us feel when we're first faced with a behavioral crisis, either for ourselves or for our loved ones. Where do we go and where do we start? We know that we need to improve on navigation, and that's one of our Act Now areas of focus. Housing is another area of focus, and community and support services, we'll see that in a second. So with regard to some of those areas where we see the need to act now, whole community navigation on the left and crisis care ecosystems on the right. The navigation, I think, is in our next slide. Yes. Yeah. So these are just meant to be examples of existing smartphone applications that I've downloaded to my phone, you could download to your phone, that begins to provide resources in their areas. The one on the left is our own county with links to the 200 programs that the Orange County Behavioral Health Department provides for those who are eligible to receive those services. And the one on the right, Mental Health U, comes from San Antonio. It is geographic centric to San Antonio, Texas. These and others are examples that we have looked at, and we've said to ourselves as a coalition, this is an area that we can't wait. We know that there needs to be better navigation. It needs to be at your fingertips, readily available in a way that you can use it now when you're in crisis. You can also use it before there's a crisis to give yourself more insight and information, and you can use it after crisis during the recovery phase. And so frankly, we're leaning forward with the County of Orange and elsewhere to create a application as one of many tools that will help to navigate the behavioral health system. So with regard to crisis stabilization, Marshall shared with us that our emergency departments in our emergency rooms are not well suited for helping folks with behavioral health conditions. And there are places that can more efficiently and more effectively support our loved ones in that crisis stage. And so what we focused on is the need for crisis stabilization units within the crisis ecosystem. The County of Orange has one crisis stabilization unit. It is clear to the coalition members, which include all the folks that Marshall shared on the second or third slide, the broad array of participants. It is clear that we need more CSUs. And there is active work being led by all members of the coalition and principally by Dan Young, who we mentioned earlier for siting. Dan is such a capable guy with such a level of humility. Dan says, well, if the system of care will simply let me know what it is that's needed, then I'll take that for action, and I'll go out and where there needs to be physical infrastructure, I'll help site it, drawing from his vast background of that kind of work. So we know that that we need more than the one, and that resource, the crisis stabilization resource, frankly needs to be geographically distributed throughout the county. We're not quite sure where they should go. We know they need to be distributed, but specifically where, we think that another 2 or 3 or 4, more than we have now, is the right number in order to meet the needs of the county, frankly, and our loved ones. That work really has already paid dividends. About 2 weeks ago, the Orange County Board of Supervisors voted to purchase a location in Orange to establish the second crisis stabilization center. Frankly, along with some other aspects, it's a large enough facility that will accommodate other uses as well, specifically focused on mental health. That's a big win, given the challenges that we've seen in this county over the last couple of years, trying to find location number 2. So we've got it, and we have every expectation that with Dan's efforts and the rest of the coalition, the rest of the locations will be soon to be identified. So it's in Orange on Anita Street.
Number 1's in Santa Ana.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you asked what number 1 was. I answered number 2. Yeah, sorry. It's clear that as folks crisis need is being met through crisis stabilization units, both from a behavioral standpoint and from a substance use standpoint, that they need to receive supportive housing as well, and that's the little piece on the right. So we're working on that, frankly, at the same time. The name that I mentioned a moment ago, Dan Young, is integrally involved in that, drawing from his experience both leading the city of Santa Ana for many years as its mayor and leading the Irvine Company for many years as its president. So a little graphic of the existing map of the County of Orange and its 34 plus cities. So there's the Santa Ana location for the current county crisis center, 10 to 14 beds. Its intent is to be that place where folks that are in crisis can come to for less than 24 hours, instead of necessarily going to that emergency room that isn't as well suited or designed or meant for serving adequately those needs. And so imagine with me, if you will, 3 or 4 more of those red dots distributed throughout the county. And imagine with me, if you will, some resources also distributed throughout the county that provides more lengthy period of care in a collaborative center of care beyond the 24 hours the crisis stabilization unit is designed to be able to serve. Well, so here we go. 3 to 4 maybe coordinated urgent care centers, crisis stabilization centers, and perhaps 2 to 3 comprehensive support centers. This is the vision that we've created as a coalition. This is in our Act Now category. We're leaning forward and identifying these spots right now. So as another element of the Act Now determination that the coalition reached, we determined the value in taking this group of the willing and creating an actual legal entity, a nonprofit, a 501c3. And we came together and talked about it for a little bit, and as of last December, that 501c3 was created, frankly, with the efforts, significant efforts of Providence St. Joseph Healthcare System and the Kaiser Permanente system here in Orange County. And that new nonprofit has a name. It's a real legal entity, and it's called Mind OC. Sir, please.
And just like the coalition itself, it's important to highlight these aren't the only 2 member entities of Mind OC. The only reason this slide is structured this way is Providence St. Joe's and Kaiser both chipped in a pretty substantial amount of money to lift this thing. But the board representation of Mind OC reflects all of those entities that you saw up on the coalition screen. Thanks for that.
Marshall, thank you for that. In fact, it was December 8th of last year when MindOC was legally created, and it was January of this year that the first board sat and had its first board meeting. It's got all the elements, the bylaws, and the officers that are needed for this organization to exist and to really do the necessary work that it's set out to do. So we're not going to take questions right now. I think we're going to take questions later when all the presentations have been made. But that is the message of hope I hope you've heard, and the progress that we're doing to really lean forward and make a real difference for the best healthcare system on the planet for everyone in the County of Orange. Do you want to close this? I don't know how do we close it? That worked.
Oh no, now you can see me. I've been told I have a good face for radio. Our next speaker is Luke Maxwell. I'm excited to hear his story. After suffering from undiagnosed depression as a teenager, which culminated in a violent suicide attempt at 16 years old, Luke Maxwell learned that 1 in 4 of his peers were suffering in the same way he was. Determined to turn his bad experiences into something good, he founded You Can't Be Erased, and has since spoken to tens of thousands of teens, parents, educators, and many others across the nation, bringing his story of hope and forgiveness to those of us in need. Luke Maxwell.
So I have a quick question for you. Have you been in a crossroads at your life? And by crossroads, I can mean something as small and silly as regular Cheerios or Honey Nut Cheerios. Or maybe if you're a Southern Californian born and raised like me, avocado on that burrito or no avocado. Is it worth that $1.50? Is it? That's a small crossroads, right? That most of us has been at, I hope, but I'm not the only one. But there's also big crossroads in our lives. Crossroads that we're at the point and we have no idea which direction to go in. And I know firsthand what that's like because I've been at that crossroad. I've been at the crossroad where I've looked and I have two options. I had life and I had death. I looked at those two options, and I chose death. And the thing is, I'm not alone in that. As we've heard many times before, there's an epidemic sweeping our country, in our homes, in our churches, in our schools, in our neighborhoods. Is that people that look like you and me on the outside are suffering from catastrophic mental illness on the inside. Especially when we look at our children. When we look at the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, that tells us that 1 in 4, in fact the number's higher, it's 29.9% to be precise, of high school age teenagers are suffering from depression. And that 1 in 12 of the teenagers that you know, that you've interacted with, some teenagers that you love, 1 in 12 attempt suicide. I'm not alone in this. And that's why I'm here, to give you a different perspective. We've heard great perspectives so far, fascinating perspectives. But there's a perspective that isn't often told. The perspective of a teenager who's lived through this, who's gone through this, and has given up on their struggles. And I'm not a doctor, first of all. There is no way. I'm 21 years old, still going to college part-time, working on a bunch of different passions in my life. But I've lived through this. I've had this experience that so many others have experienced, but haven't shared, haven't talked about. And I'm here to show the light, to break the darkness. Because as a teenager, I didn't know what depression was. I didn't know what mental illness was. I didn't know that I could fall so deep. Nobody did. Nobody around me knew that I could. But I also didn't know that there is so much hope out there. So much. And I had no idea the potential that I had with my life. So if we go back to the beginning, we look at me as a funny little kid, unbelievable amounts of energy, too much energy, I would say, looking back. I was a super happy kid raised in a good Catholic family. You know, I had 6 siblings. I was happy. But then starting around the age of 12, I began noticing things starting to change. And it happened slowly. All of a sudden, my perspective on right and wrong became blurred. And I thought, oh, I'm growing up. I'm becoming a teenager, right? I'm finally seeing the world, through my adult old eyes. I've always had a problem with just keeping my ego down. But then it started to get worse. All of a sudden, I started feeling sad all the time. And that was odd, because I was always happy. I started not being able to sleep at night. And later I learned that not only was I not able to sleep at night, but that it wasn't all in my head. It wasn't just me being a sad teenager. Is that not being able to sleep at night most likely was the result of the chemical imbalance in my brain that was the cause of my depression. So we're not just talking about in my head, I'm just, seeing things, feeling things that aren't real. It's affecting me on a biological level in many, many ways. As time went on, I began to feel worse. Soon I was keeping secret everything I was feeling, everything I was doing. I thought I can't let anybody know. Why? Because I thought my parents would get me in so much trouble. I thought I'll be grounded forever. I shouldn't be feeling this way. I shouldn't be acting out this way. Because what I was doing is, at first I thought, okay, this is going to pass, this is going to go away, and it didn't. And so I started trying everything I could do to cope with these feelings. First thing I did is I was like, okay, what helps me distract? What distracts me from this world? What helps me feel not so miserable? The answer was reading, which if your kids were in their room alone or reading most of the time that I had free, you think, great, they're reading. That's absolutely fabulous. The problem was, it was excessive. And so I dove myself into reading, using that as a coping mechanism. That didn't work. It didn't make me happy. And then so I got into porn. And I thought, this is going to make me happy. I'm going to feel love. I'm going to be happy. Finally, something's going to help me escape this terrible world I'm living in. But guess what? That didn't work. And so I just started trying to mask my feelings, started trying to hide it, push it down, and nothing worked. Soon I was beyond miserable. Every day of my life, just thinking, why am I even here? What am I doing with my life? Why am I feeling this way when no one else around me was? I kept to myself. I was quiet. I didn't really act out. And so to most people around me, I was just, quiet Luke. Not a huge deal, right? Just Luke. Nobody knew what was going on inside. And this is the huge danger, especially with teenage depression, is that many times the signs can get confused. When are we dealing with normal teenage angst? And when are we dealing with a severe mental illness? By the way, my way is to say, let's ignore if you're clinically depressed or not. Are you having trouble sleeping? Let's fix that. Are you feeling sad and miserable right now? Let's fix that. We can get caught up in labeling ourselves, calling ourselves something, which can be helpful for doctors to diagnose you. Don't get me wrong. But that's my way of focusing on it now. But back then, I had no idea what was going on. And then soon, when I was 14 years old, I would go to bed after living with this for 2 years, it's just getting worse. I would go to bed planning how I'd kill myself the next day. And this continued on for years. Somehow I clung on to life. For some reason, I didn't go through with it. Until finally I came to my breaking point. I came to my crossroads. I woke up the morning of December 3rd, 2012, 16 years old now, living with this for 4 years. And I thought, what's the point? Why bother? I'm useless. I'm worthless. Nobody wants me around. People would be happier if I was gone. There's no God, definitely, right? There's no God. I completely lost my faith. Who all-loving God would give me this much pain? Yeah, right. And so I truly believed that I was alone in the world, that I truly didn't matter, that I truly had no potential. And this is what I believed. This is what I believed who I was. This was my identity. And so on that morning, I decided this is it. I'm done. My chore that day was to clean out our big 12-seater van, bright green, dents all over it, right? The typical big family van. I simply asked my mom for the keys so I could listen to the radio. I was building myself up, working myself up for it, pretending to clean for a couple minutes, and then I took my chance. I jumped into the driver's seat, turned on the ignition, backed out of the driveway, and sped down the road. After driving about half a mile, I barreled straight through a stop sign and sighted a white SUV coming the opposite direction. I saw this and I thought, this is my chance. I'm going to end my pain. I'm going to be free. This world will be free of me. The world will be a better place without me. And to be clear, I didn't want to die. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to be free of this misery and this pain. And after trying everything I could think of, this was the only option. It was all I had left. And so I accelerated, hit the pedal to the metal, and going 60 miles per hour, wearing no seatbelt, I swerved and slammed head-on into that oncoming vehicle. As you might be able to imagine, 60 miles per hour, the crash was horrific. Both vehicles actually flipped in midair several times before coming to a rest at the side of the road, completely totaled. To be honest, I was in a daze. When I kind of came to, I was running down the side of the road in shock. I had a million thoughts running through my head. But the number one thing I realized was that my worst nightmare had just come true. I had survived. I had not planned for this. I thought this was impossible. I made sure of it. I went to such extremes to make sure I would not survive this, and yet I did. And all I could think of was, why? Why did I have to be the only person in the world to feel like this? Because that's what I believed. I believed that no one else had experienced this before. And why did I have to keep on living? Why couldn't the pain just go away? Eventually, the police came, the ambulance came. When I told them I did it on purpose, I was arrested, and I was sent to the hospital. That's when my parents came. Now, I can't even pretend to imagine what they were going through at the time. I'm not even going to try. But they came to me on that hospital bed. I was in a neck brace. I was tied to the bed. And they said, "We love you, and we're going to do whatever we can to help you." And to tell you the truth, I didn't believe them. I wasn't healed by that event. I was still in the murkiness, the darkness of despair, of thinking everyone around me lies. Nobody really wants me. It was something I held on to and believed for so long, I couldn't just let that go. After extensive testing and scans, we found that out of that 60-mile-per-hour crash, no seatbelt, I survived completely unharmed. All I had was a little scratch in my arm. I don't even have a scar. It is truly a miracle I survived. There is no doubt in my mind about that. I shouldn't have survived that. It was made clear. Nobody could figure out how I did. And yet I was there. And all I could think was, why? Why? How is this happening? And what's going to happen next? I was transferred to a mental facility on a 72-hour hold. And every day my parents came and visited me. I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder there. I was put on medication immediately. And after those 3 days were up, after hearing everybody around me tell me, you can get better. Here's how to get better. We believe in you. I decided I want to get better. Of course I want to be happy. Who doesn't? And so I decided to make that step. And for those of you who have suffered from a severe mental illness, you know, it's not just one step. There are a lot of steps. In fact, I'm still stepping. I'm still climbing that staircase. But I really want to get better. And I promise you, it wasn't only because my dad was sleeping in my room to make sure that I didn't do anything again. 6 weeks. And it's okay for me to say that. I'm not saying behind his back because he's actually here listening to this right now. I really wanted to get better. But we didn't know what to do. What do we do? What do we do in this situation? How do we proceed from something like this? And so we just tried everything we could. I was still taking medication. I went to see a therapist twice a week. And we just tried things. My parents did extensive research. They went to see my therapist as well as I did to learn on how they could help me. And so what we did was we focused on healing my body, my mind, and my soul. My body through exercise, watching what I eat, seeing, well, do you have an allergic reaction to something? Because if you do, that could hurt your mental health as well as your body because they're so linked. And this came from my spiritual director who told me, Luke, you know what you need to do? So you need to go to bed at 8:30 every night and wake up at like 6:30, 7:30. Said, you need 9 hours of sleep. And I went, 9 hours of sleep? Like, come on, what teenager gets a full 9 hours of sleep every single night? I've met maybe 2. He said, no, you need to do it. And of course, he was a priest. You're not going to say no. So I did. I tried. And of course, I wasn't perfect. And that's the most important thing to realize, that I realized during this journey, is that the goal is not to be perfect today. No, it's not. The goal is to be better tomorrow. And that was the mantra that I lived. And so we healed my body. We healed my mind through medication and therapy. And then once I was at a place that I was ready, we started healing my soul. Through going to confession, through going to mass, through the sacraments, through prayer, through meditation, through regaining my relationship with God. And that was his own journey that's still going on today. And I still have so much work to do. But the thing as I realize is that recognizing and overcoming your struggles is not enough. I realize that there's one more step to this equation. And that's what I call being unashamed. Now, here's what this means. This means to me is taking your struggles, taking all that bad stuff in your life, whether it's choosing the wrong kind of Cheerios or whether it's facing death in the eye. Taking that bad experience and saying, I'm going to do something good with this. I'm going to turn the bad in my life, I'm going to make it into something good. And that's what I did. But I didn't know what to do. I had no idea. I was 17 years old. So I was still 16 at the time. So I was like, I'll start a blog, because that's what people do, right? So I started a blog. I made a video and just started. And then slowly, as people found out about my story, as I started growing my audience, as I started doing more, I realized I need to do even more. What I realized is that I need to follow my passions. I was given a second lease on life. I was given a second chance to live. That doesn't just happen. And I realized that so many of my peers were dying where I had survived. And I realized I was not going to waste this shot. And so I just started doing everything I could, everything I thought, I want to do this, I'm going to do it. And so I started speaking. I gave my first speech ever at a conference at 17 years old and never stopped. Never, because I saw this is affecting people. This is helping people. When you get someone, a teenager, a 15-year-old girl come up to you and say, I was planning to kill myself, your story just saved my life. I'm going to talk to a therapist, a school counselor. I'm going to talk to my parents. That kind of thing changes you. And I realized my why I was here. I realized that God had another plan for me. There was something different in mind that he had for me. That I went through all this pain, all this struggle, all of this bad stuff. Because now it's turning into something that now saves lives. And when I look out a crowd like you, people who made time to come to a place like this, to listen to these speakers, to be informed, to be inspired, ready to change lives. I'm reminded of the people in my own life that have done the same thing, my parents, my siblings, my friends, who've all done so much for me, that have forgiven so much for me, because to be honest, I was a bad kid. I was a jerk of a friend. I was not that great. But now, seeing them embrace me, and not only was it them, but a very special man, the man named Lenny Ross, who was the driver of that white SUV, that I completely totaled him, sent him to the hospital with a broken sternum and lacerations all over his body from broken glass. 8 months after this crash, we reached out to each other through the DA who was prosecuting me, who later turned around and fought for me. We reached out to each other. We met at a coffee shop, and I'll tell you the truth, I was scared. Because if it were me, I would have been mad. Right? I mean, you're just driving along one day, and boom, out of nowhere, your life is radically changed. And so I didn't know what to expect. But he came to me, and he walked up, and I didn't know what to do, so I just gave him a big hug. And I said, I'm so sorry. Like, what did you say in that situation? And he just took a step back, and he said, that's all I wanted to hear. And from that moment, I just realized I was just forgiven instantly, like that. And later I learned, not only did it forgive me at that moment, he forgave me on the hospital bed that night. He knew that there was someone who was suffering. He knew that there was a kid who needed help. And he decided that he wasn't going to make an enemy with that person, that he was instead going to make an ally. And it's just moments like this that only further encourage me on my journey. And that's why I'm here today. First of all, to give you myself as a resource. I have communicated one-on-one with hundreds of teens and parents and educators and priests and any demographic you can name, listening to their stories, helping them with the knowledge of my own experience of what I've learned. And to be frank, Dr. Aaron Kheriaty's book, The Catholic Guide to Depression, that was my ground zero. That's where I started to learn about myself, what my disease was, and how to improve. That book started so many things, and that's why I'm so glad to know the man today. Such a fabulous man he is. But to offer you myself as a resource, but also just this inspiration to you, is that I came from the worst place you can get. I literally came from the precipice of death. And yet, I've come all the way over to here. Changed everything around. And so my question to you is, I know it's hard. I know firsthand how difficult that change can be. But think about your life. Think about the people in your own life. And think that what you could do to make that change. I'm standing here unashamed to inspire you to create action. I'm standing here sharing my story, giving you this information, giving you me as a resource, as a point of hope, so you can be heroes. And that's what I want from all of you. That's why I named my organization You Can't Be Erased, to tell every person that they're indelible. They're not a pencil that can just be erased from the world without anyone knowing. Every single person leaves an indelible mark on this world. Whether you're just smiling at someone as they walk out through a door, or whether you are their best friend, indelible marks are left. And so I encourage every single one of you, when you go outside, to the people that you love, the people that you care about most, the people that are at crossroads right now, whether they're big or whether they're small, every single person that you love, that you know, is at some kind of crossroad. And so I want to encourage you to be that person that helps them make that journey, that helps them choose the right decision. Whether it's simply saying, hey, I went to a mental health event today. Here's what I learned. Whether it's something as simple as smiling at somebody. Simple. The smallest act you could possibly do. A small act that could have such big changes. I want you to go out to those people, and I want you to tell them that they matter, that they're beautiful people, that they are truly indelible, and that they can't be erased.
Thank you, Luke, for that inspirational talk. It reminds me that a self-esteem is not a feeling, it's a realization, a recognition of the goodness and beauty that's already within you, just by the nature of being a human being. And there's a poster in my high school that said, God doesn't make junk. I've always lived by that. Our next speaker is Madeline Hall. She's the Senior Director of Foundation Relations and Institutional Initiatives at Children's Hospital of Orange County, which is known as CHOC, as you know. She worked for many years in education and funding in nonprofits and the public sector. Let's introduce Madeline Hall.
Thank you. I just want to thank the organizers for letting me follow Luke. That's really great. No, he's amazing. So Matt asked me to keep it a little bit short, and since kids are short, I will. So I'm here to talk a little bit about kids. So I've been at CHOC a little over 5 years. I was in education and funding prior to that. I lived in Orange County most of my life, worked in LA most of the time until I came to CHOC. Taught at Rosary High School in Fullerton many, many years ago. So if you have older kids, I might have taught them, and I'm sorry. So a couple of things. I am not a clinician either. I have the privilege of working on some of the special initiatives at CHOC, and two of them are a mental health initiative very close to my heart, and the other is spiritual care. And I think two of our chaplains are here, Father James and Rabbi Joe. And if you look really closely at Rabbi Joe's yarmulke on the top of his head, you'll see the Chaco bear right on the top of his head. So I'm gonna be very brief, I promise, but I do want to tell you a tale of two Chacos. This is Chaco, our mascot. The first tale is sort of true, and I'm going to embellish it a little bit. And the second tale is one that is true, not true of Chaco, but true of many kids that we serve at CHOC and many kids in our county. So the true part of this is that Chaco was designed by a Disney artist for CHOC many, many years ago. And the story behind him is that he fell out of a tree and broke his arm. And that's how CHOC got started, because he had to go somewhere to get his arm taken care of. And so what happened, though, this is the embellished part, is that Chaco fell out of a tree And several things happened. The neighbor came running toward him. The friend said, "That must hurt. We're going to help you get you some help right away." Chaco's mom said, "You're not in trouble." Chaco's dad said, "You're going to feel better soon." The nurse said, "What a brave boy." And the pediatrician said, "I know what needs to be done. We're going to get that bone set and give you something for pain." And when Chaco got home, his aunt and uncle came over and brought him his favorite meal. And the school said, "We'll help you catch up. And furthermore, we're going to host a program for all the kids in the school about tree climbing safety." And the insurance paid for whatever Chaco needed to feel better and to heal properly. Now, there's this other Chaco that I want to talk about just briefly, and that is Chaco began showing signs of a depressive illness. Lasted more than 2 weeks, which is kind of a sign that, you've got this depressive thing going on. He lost interest in everything, even in the things he used to enjoy. He stopped calling his buddies. He was depressed and irritable most of the time, nearly every day. He was sleepless, like Luke talked about, and his appetite changed. And the neighbor stopped talking to him because he was so crabby, and the friends stopped calling him because he was such a downer. And one friend even heard Chaco say that everyone would be better off if Chaco wasn't around. But the friend never told anyone because Chaco made him promise. And the mom said, "Why are you laying around? Clean up your room." And the dad said, "How could you have any problems? I work hard day and night, so you have plenty of grub and a nice fur coat." And the pediatrician said, "Preteens just get moody closer to puberty." And nobody brought Chaco his favorite meal, and his aunt and uncle thought that Chaco had bad parents. Teachers were frustrated. Happily, the counselor at school did have Chaco see a psychologist, but mom called the insurance carrier, and the insurance carrier sent a 3-page list in 8-point font of all of the people he was authorized to see, with no indication whatsoever of who had any experience or expertise with kids, and many of them had waiting lists unless the family could pay cash. So you wouldn't be here tonight if you didn't know that many of these things are true of our non-system that Marshall talked about. So Chaco's behavior was persistent, one of the signs that we need to be careful about with kids. And instead of coming toward Chaco, people backed away, and one friend didn't understand that there are secrets that no friend should ever keep. Something we try to teach kids, right? There's some secrets you never keep. And mom and dad saw, but they didn't really take the time to talk. And the pediatrician dismissed the symptoms. And in defense of our pediatricians, I have to say that they have 15 minutes with their patients. And because they don't know where to refer, they say things like, "They'll grow out of it," or "It's hormones." And the truth is that statistically, 1/3 of all visits to pediatricians today are for purely psychological reasons. And that's a little scary. So you figure 1/3, 1/3 physical reasons, 1/3 psychological, and 1/3 is a mix of the two. Best practice is that you have a mental health provider in the pediatric practice that can see those kids right away. And that's exactly what you do, right, at a pediatric practice, which is a wonderful thing, Mr. Sanders. And best practice is also that there are behavioral health screenings that happen for everyone. Kaiser started this with 11-year-olds not too long ago, and many, many pediatric practices are starting to do that, and we certainly do it at CHOC. And as CHOC, as Kay always said and taught us at CHOC, it's a no casserole illness. The stigma of bad parenting is certainly there, and we cannot deny that there's an impact of parental mental health, there's an impact of triggers and things that maybe parents might be involved with or the family's involved with that might trigger a condition. But the truth is that mental health conditions, it's an equal opportunity effector. It affects the rich and poor. It affects stable and unstable families. As for the school, not all schools are created equal. And the mental health approach of each school and school district and school board varies from district to district and school to school. And their openness to things like suicide prevention varies because there is a myth out there that if a school is involved in suicide prevention or provides an assembly, just like Chaco almost had that, tree climbing seminar, there's a myth that if you provide that means that the kids are going to kill themselves. It promotes suicide. All of that is a myth. Because what happens is, just like Luke, something's happening inside and it needs to be addressed rather than just put under the rug. As for insurance, about half the kids on our county are on Medi-Cal, and about half the kids in our county are on commercial insurance. Kids on Medi-Cal are either from low-income families or they have severe disabilities and are under a state program. And the other half are commercial through their parents' businesses. To be honest, even though the majority of our patients at CHOC are Medi-Cal patients in many of our specialties, the truth is we worry as much about those kids that are on commercial insurance. And the reason is that the story about the list was true. Somebody very high in law enforcement in our county told me about his young daughter that he's very concerned about. And he got that list, that 3-page list, 8-point font, no idea of what exactly he needed to do for his daughter. So all of that is true. And the truth is that there are adult therapists throughout the county that think they can serve kids because they think they're good with kids. But the truth is that depression and anxiety and other disorders that are pediatric are very different than adult problems. And they need to be treated by people who, you know, whether you have a paper on the wall or not, that understand developmentally what happens in that little brain and what happens inside a child's processing. And I think that it was very telling for me that UCSF just released a study just a couple weeks ago talking about neurogenesis, meaning that that's when you produce those neurons in your head. And the thinking was that maybe we could still produce neurons well into our adulthood. This study came out with something a little bit different, and it said that actually we stop producing new neurons in our brain while we're teenagers. And so, first of all, that told me that's why I can't find my keys since I was about 20. But it doesn't mean that we can't learn as adults, but it means that we have an enormous opportunity before kids, while kids are little, because that's when you can make an impact. That's when kids who are 3 and 4 and 5 that are coming to our emergency room right now, that are exhibiting signs of self-injury, of hyperaggression, of extreme withdrawal, that's our opportunity. And most of the time, it's 7 to 10 years before they get treated. So those are some of the things that we want to try to change. And so I think, you know, I'm going to cut off some of the statistics and things like that, but I will say, if you remember nothing else about kids when you leave here tonight, and then I'm just going to say a couple other suggestions about what you can do. If you remember nothing else, remember that half of the adults with lifetime mental illness, half of the adults with lifetime mental illness had symptoms before age 14 that went unaddressed. So we will never, never solve the adult mental health problem until we deal with kids. And so I'm very happy that I see nods, which is wonderful. Keep in mind that you've heard the statistic 1 in 5 here tonight. So if you took all 750,000 kids we have in Orange County, and you figure 1 in 5, so that's 150,000 kids that will struggle at some point with a diagnosable disorder before they're 18. So imagine 3, most of you have been to Angel Stadium. Imagine 3 Angel Stadiums full of those kids, all of those kids that are going to have that diagnosable condition. Only 1 stadium full will get treatment. So that leaves us with a tremendous challenge, and I'm glad to hear about the activity of the coalition. It's fantastic. We're members of that coalition. But I have to say, let's not forget the needs of the kids, because we cannot solve that adult problem unless we also deal with kids. So just kind of skipping forward, I'm just going to say a few things that we can all do. There's some really important things that are happening in the county right now for kids. There is no system, I understand that. But there's the beginnings there's little pieces of systems that have started. I'm proud to say that CHOC took a tremendous financial risk in no small part because of the inspiration of Kay and Rick Warren, to open an inpatient unit for kids that are that severe that need inpatient care. There'll be the first pediatric beds that are opening in California, the first pediatric beds that allow parents to room in when it's appropriate, and the first pediatric program where there are 7 days of programming. It's not that you come in on Friday night and then you don't have anything happen until Monday, which is what happens in most programs. And that opens next month. which is, and thank you. But I will say that their very first responsibility when you're opening inpatient beds, and I think this applies to both kids and adults, is that your first responsibility is to make sure no kid ever gets there and no kid ever comes back. And so our big impetus right now is to begin to build programs, and again, we can't do it alone. So there are many partners, the county's working hard, many folks are working hard to build more programs that are sensitive and to kids and have people who are qualified to treat kids. So one of them is intensive outpatient programming. You saw that on the slide before. We have one that's just opened last month for kids to keep them out of the inpatient situation, 8 weeks, 4 days a week, parents involved, to try to restructure what's going on in there and redirect. There is a co-occurring clinic, and I just want to make a tiny commercial about this. Kids that have medical problems are at higher risk of mental health problems than other kids. Kids with asthma, 2 times more likely. Kids with diabetes, 3 times more likely. And then we look at the family's impact. So we have about 4,000 epilepsy patients at CHOC because we are an epilepsy center. The divorce rate among kids with intractable epilepsy is 85%, because that is a devastating illness and it's devastating on the family. So again, trying to wrap those services around, wrap them around the child, wrap them around the family. And there's some other really cool things going on. I'm just going to mention one of them. Well, I'll mention 2, sorry. In the emergency room, we started a special treatment program. We're doing it with one hospital in North Carolina and Boston Children's Hospital in Massachusetts that starts treatment in the emergency room, which is very exciting because we've seen a huge uptick in kids coming to the emergency room with mental health problems, as have all the other hospitals in our county. And the other thing is, there is an early childhood mental health coalition of which many organizations are members, including CHOC, and in May is phase 1 of that program, where there are early mental health consultants going into childcare and preschool settings, and it's to help teachers manage behavior and things like that. But from CHOC's perspective, it is also, and this is part of our investment and the investment of several people who have donated to this project, it's our interest to find kids early. So if we see that 3-year-old that's extremely withdrawn, if we see that hyper-aggressive child, if we see a child that's abusing animals already at 5, that we can get them into treatment while those neurons are still being developed and change the trajectory of their lives, and work with the parents as well. So, and a couple other things, are some exciting things happening. You've heard some of them. There's some good things going on in some of our local school districts. There's some great evidence-based programs like Sources of Strength and others that we're all learning about now that can go into the schools. The biggest favor we can do for our schools at this point, I think, is to help principals. I was in education for a long time. Help the principals sort through the many, many voices and brochures and all of the stuff that they get so that they can sort through and find out evidence-based things they can do in their schools. And then go to my dream is to go to each and every school board in the county and say, we're all in this together. These kids are right in front of you. And the future, one of our volunteers, John Storbeck, who's the general manager at Knott's Berry Farm, said his dream is to make a commercial of a homeless person, an older homeless person who does have a lifetime mental illness, and ratchet that back to the 3rd grade. Because our future homeless are in the 3rd grade. So we've got to be able to get to those kids. So a couple things. One is there's all kinds of things that you can do. You've heard about many of them, so I'm just going to skip over a lot of them. What you could come to the Ducks game on Sunday night, because the theme is pediatric mental health at the Ducks game, which is really fun. And there's an angel game that Extraordinary Lives Foundation and CHOC are co-sponsoring on May the 12th. You can come if you're not rooting for the Minnesota Twins. And there's going to be early mental health messages and general mental health messages at that game. So wherever we can go. I speak at a lot of Kiwanis and Rotary meetings and right now. So if you need us to come somewhere, a couple of us to come and talk about kids' mental health or mental health in general, happy to do it. Come in partnership with others. So happy to do that and get that message out. I think, many other sort of suggestions: zero tolerance for bullying of people of any age, Let's respect the diversity of people. Diversity is not just about race, it's also about our biological and physical attributes and our mental health attributes. So all of those things you know because you're good, caring people. And I think the last thing I will say is think before judging. So I can only just say this personally, that I never look at a tantrum in Costco quite the same way as I did before. Because 97% of the time, it's just a tantrum. But 3% of the time, it might not be. And you see a family struggling, and what we see with our families is that they go underground. They don't take their kids to Costco, they don't socialize with their friends, and then that child reemerges typically in the 3rd grade at age 8 in special education in our fastest growing group, which are kids in special education with emotional disturbance. So let's get them early. So watch for the tantrum in Costco, compassion for the family with a drug-addicted son, compassion for the family with a child struggling with their sexual identity, compassion for the family with a daughter with an eating disorder. And then, you know, Chaco's big message, which is from the scripture, bear with one another.
Well, if that wasn't information overload, I don't know what was. You heard a lot of great stuff tonight, but this is not an easy ministry that we're engaged in. There's a lot of hard work. And one of my brothers from another mother was in the back. Are you still there, Darnell? No, Darnell left. But he said to me, what can we do? And right now, we're all sort of trying to figure that out as a coalition. What can we do? We have some pretty concrete ideas, but we need yours. But in addition, what we really need is your advocacy. We need you to stand up when someone says something about someone with a mental illness and say, no, it's not a person, it's not a mentally ill person, it's a person with a mental illness. We need you to understand that sometimes these are the most difficult people to work with, to love, to see. We need you to realize that to engage that homeless person on the street is an act of kindness that will help their mental health. All of these are very, very practical things that you can do. But as we move forward, we're going to need your help with advocacy, because a lot of people are going to say, not in my backyard. A lot of people are going to say, well, no, I don't want to go there. I live in Newport Beach, or I live somewhere else, and I don't want that in my neighborhood. I don't want to have to deal with those people. Well, those people are us. So it's your brother, it's your sister, it's your nephew, it's your niece, it's maybe one of your parents. But we all have to be in this fight together. So I'm going to ask Father Carey to come up, standing in the back there, and I'm going to ask Kay to come up again and to give us a couple of closing prayers. Thank you all very, very much.
It's nice to meet you as well. Thank you. Would you like me to? And then you close? You close? All right. Would you pray with us? And then I'll hand the mic to the Father. God, I thank you for each person that's here. I thank you for what drove them here. I don't know if it was their own need, someone they love themselves, someone that they care about desperately, someone they're worried about. Maybe they just heard about it and decided that that this was a place they could give back. I don't know why we're here, but we're here and it's for a reason. Thank you for the encouragement that we've received. Thank you for the hope. Thank you for the conviction. Some of us have needed to be convicted, and some of us have needed encouragement. Some have needed comfort. Some have needed inspiration. Some have needed a practical idea of what to do. But thank you that you meet us all exactly where we are. I do just pause for a moment to think of anyone who is living with that hidden desire, maybe nobody else knows about it, to end their lives. And we don't want to just pretend that it doesn't happen, or that it's not really going on in our homes, or it's not going on within us. so grateful that you've promised that you would never leave us or forsake us. So, Father, I pray that there would be a spark of hope in the darkest places for anyone tonight who feels like they're barely hanging on by a fingernail. May we surround them with compassion, with tenderness, we make that same promise that we won't leave. I am excited to see what you're going to do with your people about mental illness in Orange County. Thank you for the privilege of being here tonight.
Lord, we see the signs of your Spirit in bringing us all here together tonight. For whatever reasons we came here, it was you who drew us here. And we ask you now to send us home, back to our homes, our families, our children, our parents, our neighbors, back to our workplaces, back into our communities, our organizations, our hospitals, and all those different networks of friends and strangers to which we all belong, our churches, our communities. We ask you to make each one of us an instrument of your peace. Make each one of us a sign of your love and a reminder, as our speaker said tonight, that no one can be erased, that each of us are made in your image and likeness, and that all of us are important to you and loved by you and loved by us. Give us that strength and send your Spirit with us as we go forth tonight. Fill our hearts, fill our minds, and give us the energy we need to accomplish this good work. And we do all of this in the name of God, who has given us life and who invites us, challenges us, calls us to treasure that life wherever we go. Amen.